Welcome to our Quest AI series, where we discuss getting started or expanding on AI projects. With me, I have Johann. He's our chief data scientist. He's here to answer some recent questions that I have. Hey, Johann.
Hey, Jess. What do you have for me today?
All right. So first, I've got a client that we work with. So they've been asking, we've been working on consolidating our data the past 2 years. We have it all stored in Snowflake right now, and they're being asked by our CTO to start running AI models on top of that data. So the question is, how do we get started? Do we hire a data scientist, an architect? Do we engage with Microsoft because we're on Azure? Can Quest AI help?
Okay. Well, definitely the answer is going to be yes. Quest AI can help, but let's go through what the problem is, right? So this happens a lot, and you probably see that where a CTO or even the CEO would go to the tech team and say, "Hey guys, we need to do AI. Do some AI for next quarter." And it's a lot of pressure if you don't really know how to get started, because it can be expensive if you just experiment. And that's all you're doing, testing out, new technologies. Now, you mentioned they're on Snowflake, right?
Yes.
Okay. So that's a good platform to be on and get started, because all your data is in one place. So that's going to be key. First thing is, do we have data? And then the second thing is, which we don't really know yet, but I assume in moving the data, they did some quality control and they checked that it's complete and, they have enough data. So let's assume that's out of the way, right? There's no questions about the data. The very next part would be, what kind of AI do we need to do? I mean, if the CTO is just asking them to do AI, that's a little vague. So have you worked with this client a lot in the past?
Yes, they are a longstanding client of ours.
Okay. And do they typically have like agile processes, or do they run like more of a waterfall, like long-term projects?
I believe it is a mixture of both.
Okay. And that's pretty common. So let's assume they have experience then with agile and they understand small little projects, right? That would be the first step, is to get them to do a prototype, or, if they want to go a little bigger, a prototype's a couple of days. And because they have the data consolidated, that should be no brainer. Or they can do a proof of concept, which gets them, a couple of weeks into a project where they have a model that they can, if they refine it, put into production. So to start off the project, right, we need to first identify what is going to be the goal. So we have to get that mystery out of the way, what the CTO was asking, do some AI. So typically what we would do is do a workshop. We'll sit for an hour or two, whiteboard, find what are the most likely candidates for use cases, and then let's try and match up the data and see what is available to meet those use cases. Once we have that, we can stack rank it and we can say, okay, this is going to be lowest hanging fruit, maybe with the highest value return. So let's prototype this, or let's go further and let's do a POC. So that's how I would get started. Now, the other question you had was, should they go hire a data scientist? And I've seen this many times play out where it doesn't play out very well. And the reason is you need leadership. With any technical project, you need somebody that's focused on the big picture, the strategy. What are we going to do with this? Believe me, I love coding. I like creating models. But if you give me unlimited time and budget, I'm going to be coding and making models all day long. I'm not going to be focused on a lot of business use cases, right? So you need somebody that's kind of elevated above that level, and they can look at the project objectively and say, you know what? This is time boxed for 8 weeks. We need to deliver X, Y, and Z, or we need to answer a question, and this is what we need to focus on. So hiring a data scientist, I wouldn't recommend that unless they've already had the practice established and they had leadership. But the fact that they're coming to you, I'm thinking they're just getting started, right?
Yes.
Okay. So that answers that question. Now, partnering with Microsoft. I think Microsoft is a great platform for machine learning and AI. Same with SageMaker on AWS. I have not worked a lot with Google, so I can't really comment on that. But what's going to happen is, if you engage with a partner like that, is that they're going to try and sell you tools. I mean, and services. That's what they do, right? So I'm a little skeptical starting off with them consulting as well, because they have a lot of tools and you can experiment and see what works for you before you commit, and have like a vendor lock-in. That's one of the things that we do is we always consult with our clients to make sure that they're not locked into specific vendors or technologies long-term. What do you think? Did that give you enough to answer the client, the question that they asked you?
I think so. Yeah. I'll give this back to them for sure. This should be helpful.
All right. Do you have another one for me?
And then I do actually. So I was actually at an event last week and someone came up to me and they had questions about ChatGPT. Being, they had read that companies are using ChatGPT to search through data like SharePoint and other documents easily. What does it take to get started and how quickly would it take to get that up and running?
So that's a hot topic right now. And I'm getting the same questions all day long. It's one of those things probably knows about ChatGPT, and then also the hype cycle, right? We're in that, that peak or going to reach that peak sometime this year. So the challenge with ChatGPT, everybody that's used it know that at the bottom of ChatGPT, they have a date, and they basically tell you that this model was trained as of this timestamp. And if you ask questions like, for instance, what was the stock market yesterday? It's not going to know. It's going to use what they call tools. Those tools, just like DALL-E is one of the tools that draws pictures for you. There's other tools that go and search like Bing or whatever. If you use ChatGPT, the interface, right? Now you might wonder, why is that? Well, it is because large language models typically are trained on a set of data and they have a lot of parameters. That's what makes them large. So you basically store all your data inside of the model and then you retrieve it using natural language. And that's the whole concept behind and I'm simplifying now, but that's the basic concept, right? So to the person that asked you the question, to their question, they're going to probably look for much more updated data. They're not going to want to train every single day or every minute or whenever something changes, right? So there's architectures around that. It's called RAG, R-A-G, and I can't remember now what it stands for, but basically what it does, it gives you the ability to have up-to-date information stored in some kind of database, right? It could be a vector database. There's other databases that support it. That is the most up-to-date data, and you use the language model to basically query that data in real time. So anytime the database gets updated, your language model has access to that information. Now, I think you also mentioned they want to know how long is it going to take, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that is the question. I always push back and say, what would be good enough? So if it's good enough to have it, let's say, address a very specific domain of the business, we can train that model. And again, I like the 8 to 10 week time frame because it's long enough to create value, but not too long to spend a lot of money and time and just go down, some path that's not going to lead you anywhere. So if we did one domain as a proof of concept, we'll be able to determine very quickly what's the challenges involved in the data, as well as their infrastructure. And also, we'll be able to start educating their team so that they can own it. One of the biggest challenges, I think, with AI is that companies look internally and they don't necessarily have all the resources, right? So how do you upskill or cross-skill your existing resources? Well, one way is to bring in partners like us that can implement the project and then bring in the team and kind of coach them along the way so that by the time the project is done, they can take some ownership. And you don't have to always rely on people like us to come and consult and do that stuff. So as long as they're okay with small incremental milestones, you can probably take every 8 weeks and implement one of the domains of the business into that language model and the ecosystem. The other thing, you just reminded me, we worked on a language model project recently with Slack integration, where they're basically using Slack as the interface to chat with the language model. And with the proof of concept, the very first thing was not Slack integration. It was just testing the model without it. So the reason I mention that is it's good to first test out what's the core concept, right? And that is the language model, and to see how well it responds and work through that. Before you go and invest in Slack integration or building a website with a chatbot interface and things like that, I don't know if you've used ChatGPT, right, Jace? I assume?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. So
yes, I have.
Yeah, that's just a web interface, but the models behind it, there's many models, right? and GPT is the model behind it. And there's a ChatGPT API as well. But all those models basically get pulled together in a service. And then what the user sees is the web interface, right? Now, if you start off with the immediate goal of building a web interface and making it fancy and all that stuff, what if the model doesn't work? So you first want to test out and make sure your models are good. So that's why if you want to respond to that client, I would say the best is to start small. Let's test out a small little subset of their data and let's see what's good enough. If they can tell us that, yes, these results look good, we go to the next step. If it's not good enough, then let's reevaluate and see, one, is this the right solution? Two, is this something that will get better, and how much better is needed? And then obviously, what's the time and the cost? And that's it.
Hey guys, so we already recorded last week's questions. So I have a bonus question for you. This came up from a contact that I have on LinkedIn. So this person asked, do you have any examples where a client saw a quick ROI from an AI project?
So we probably have to get some white papers together so we can give it to clients or potential clients because there's actually a lot of success stories out there. And the one that I can think of, I think we discussed this earlier, was a trucking logistics company. And we did a 12-week POC for them. And during that POC, we basically, we had to gather the data, which was already stored and located in a database. And we didn't have to label it because it's structured. It was already labeled for us.
Okay. Now, I was actually going to ask that question, but you just answered that for me.
Oh, good. All right.
So they did already have the labeled data.
Yes. So that's a project that we actually worked on prior to this one. We did a data warehousing project for the client just to get all their data consolidated into a centralized data repository. So if you just take into account the time of the AI project, right? The data project was separate, just the AI project. That POC was about 12 weeks. And what's interesting about it is that we did sensitivity analysis, which is a financial modeling type approach. It's not really AI. I know there's nuance. I would call it machine learning, if anything else, right? So what we did is we did for the first phase of the project, which is the POC, just to prove it out, we did what they call a one at a time analysis, sensitivity analysis. And what it is, and I'm going to get a little geeky here, but you take one variable and that's the variable you measure. And then you change some of the attributes and see how that changes that one variable. Doing that, you can do forecasting and you can kind of see when you do sensitivity analysis, you want to see how the uncertainty changes as you're changing these variables, right? And with financial planning financial forecasting, that's a big deal. A lot of CFOs will do that kind of modeling themselves. But if you have to do it at scale, and also if you have to use machine learning to build in different scenarios where you basically you trigger, you have tweaks that you do to see what the scenario is if you change market conditions or anything like that, it's a really valuable tool to have. So the reason we didn't go all the way, there's also what they call SOBOL analysis, which is now getting into more financial modeling, sensitivity training, a little bit more complicated. What that does is it basically takes every single variable and measures its impact on every other variable. So you can imagine that's much more complex, right? So if we did that from the get-go, that 12-week project wouldn't have completed. So the way that we showed ROI very quickly was to decide what is going to be valuable. Speaking to the CFO, he said that if we do the one at a time and we're able to run 1,000 scenarios through it and then give him the best scenarios, the best outcomes, and he can then evaluate it, that would be critical. So after 12 weeks, we were able to deliver on that. And that really showed value for the company. They're public traded, multi-millions of dollars. So you can imagine the impact of that 12-week project on that. Now, after that project, that is when we, introduced more sophisticated modeling, and the time to get to the next phase was about 12 weeks again. And that's just how we continued. And every time after the 12 weeks, we either added another model or we added another sensitivity analysis so that there's different methods that they could use. But that to me is probably one of the use cases that stands out as just a good way to plan. First, chew off something small that's valuable. And very often having something automated that somebody's doing manual in a spreadsheet, that's good enough because it can save a lot of time, money, or whatever else the measure might be. So that would be my one for this week. I'll probably in the next few weeks give you a couple more, Jess, so you can share that.
Thanks, Johann.
If anybody wants to send you questions, where? Like LinkedIn, or can they email you? What's the easiest?
Yes, you can. As of right now, the best thing would be LinkedIn. We are Quest AI Solutions. Also, our emails are in the LinkedIn profiles as well. So feel free to reach out with any other questions.
All right. Thanks, Jace.